I think even Menachem might not be so familiar with all the stomachs of the cows. I think he's used to dealing with mammals that have just one stomach. Good morning. We're learning as Chutz Refuah Shlema Pilan Chaya Basarach and for Meir Ben Cyril Peril. We're starting the new parak of Elu Trefus on Daf Membeis Amanav. Elu Trefus Behem. These things are a trefa by a behem. Now, a trefa, as we have said, a trefa is an animal that is destined to die because of a imperfection. It's obviously not one that was shechted. If it's shechted, that doesn't make it into a treifa. And I think the taich of nevela as opposed to treifa, a treifa who actually dies from its treifa can also become a nevela. Right? If it doesn't have a shechita, it becomes a nevela. If you shecht it and you find a treifa, then it's not a nevela. And we're also going to see there's a machlekes. The pashtus that we're going with in the Mishnah is that a treif is an animal that is going to die within a year. That's its terminally ill. There's another sheet that holds, which is expressed as a treif, that a treif is able to live, which means that the treif will eventually die from this defect, but not necessarily within a year. So as long as it's something that's going to eventually kill it, even if it's going to take 2-3 years, it's still a treif. The other mandama, the mandama that we Bapashas are going with, would say no, anything that it can live more than a year is not going to be a treifa. Now the Mishnah is going to list the treifas, and we have both a halacha l'moishe misinai, which tells us which are the treifas, and we're also going to have in the Mishnah the rule that a treifa is something that doesn't live, and both could be true, right? We're going to learn from in the Gemara a pasuk that tells us what the nature of a treifa is, but we also have halacha l'moishe misinai telling us which are the actual treifas. So Dr. Mishnah, Elu treifas b'behem. These things are a treifa b'behem. Nekuvas haveshet, a puncture, a hole in the veshet, in the esophagus. Esophagus is the food pipe. Upsukas hagageras, and a cut, kana, which is the windpipe. Nikav krum shalmoich, if there's a hole in the membrane surrounding the brain. Nikav, and we're going to have in the Gemara, we're going to discuss, it's going to be different things that are nikav, that have a hole in them, as opposed to psukas, which is that it's cut, or nishbara, which is broken. So these things are important. Nikav halev lebeis halale. If a heart has a hole in it that reaches the empty space inside. I guess the heart is made up of different layers, so it's not just enough to get through the outer layer, but it has to go all the way into the inside of the heart. Nishbara hashedra, if the vertebrae of the spine are broken, and the spinal column, or the spinal cord, I should say, which is inside of the vertebrae, is broken. It causes, when you break the shedra, when you break the spine, it causes the spinal cord to be cut. Menachem, feel free to chime in if I'm saying anything wrong. Honestly, I mean, I'm just saying it the way I understand, but I'm certainly not an expert. I've seen my daughter who's studying to be a PA with her big anatomy book, and I know there's a lot of details on these things. Nital hakoved v'loy hinshtayher menu klum. If the covet was removed and there's nothing left of it, which is interesting. I know that there's such a thing that the liver can regrow, but I also know that from people who have gotten cancer that spread to their liver, that there's a limit to how much you can remove, and it's not klum. So it's not exactly as the Mishnah is telling. The Mishnah is telling us any amount, it seems, can regenerate, at least by an animal, and it could possibly survive. My experience was not exactly like that, that you have to have a significant amount of liver left over. Hareya, the lungs, shenikva oishachasra. Lungs that either have a hole in them or they're missing some part of it. You would think that that if it was missing some of it, it's going to, right. So the Gemara is going to talk about it. You're always going to have a nikav if something is missing, right? If something is missing from the lungs, like, that's more than a hole. But we're saying this is two separate things. Reb Shimon Omer, Achi Nakav, Achi Tinaka Lobeis Hasampunis. Reb Shimon says it has to have a hole. It's not enough to just have a hole in the lungs. I guess the lungs is the outer, like the bladder, there's the membrane on the outside, but inside there are the actual functional parts of the lungs that cause it to be able to absorb oxygen and get it into the blood. So it has to reach those inner parts of the lungs. It's not enough just to puncture or be missing on the outside. So now we're going to get into the different parts of the animal's stomach, which I'm not 100% clear about it. But the first one is nikva hakeva. If the keva was got a hole in it. So these are all, there are four parts of the cow's stomach, and it's distinct from ours in that the way our stomachs work is that the food gets at some point into your stomach, which we call stomach, and the gastric juices break it down, and the food gets digested there. I think it starts even before that, but that's where the food then sits and gets eaten up by by whatever liquids there are there. By a cow, there are three other stages before that. So from the way I understand it, there's a first area that it goes into, which gets formed, the animal chews it a little bit, and then it sits there in like the storage place inside the cow. Then it moves along to something called the base hakaisis, which is an area of the cow's stomach, a second stomach, that forms into cud, into little balls of cud. And then the animal regurgitates it into its mouth, and it continues to chew that little ball of grass or whatever it is. And then finally, when it swallows it again, it moves to the next thing that starts taking it apart, which starts causing it to fall apart. And then it finally goes to the cava, which is the last one before the intestines. And the cava is where what's similar to our stomach. So, nikva hakeva, this last stomach in the processing line, gets a nekev. Nikva hamara. Mara is the gallbladder. We know the expression bitter as gall. Gall is bitter, so it's called mara. Nikvu hadakan, if there's a hole in the intestines, that's after the stomach, the food passes into the intestines. Hakeres hapnimis shenikva, shenikva roiv hachitzayna. Keres hapnimis is, I believe, the first area, the storage area for the food that these ruminants eat. So it stays there. They got a hole in the Gemara is going to explain what the keres hapnimis, as opposed to the chitzayna is. So keres of yishenikva roiv hachitzayna. If you got a hole in the inner keres, or if the outer keres was ripped along the rive of it, that's gonna be a trefa. Yehuda Hagdoila tefach v'aktana beruba. He says he disagrees that it's not that which we say about that the chitzayna, if it's torn, we said if it's torn, if it's roiv of it is torn, it's going to be a treifa. He says it's not so simple. It's only a roiv on a small animal. That a roiv is less than a tefach. But a larger animal that can have more than a tefach be torn, even though that's not a roiv, that's also going to be a treif. Hamasas ubeis hakoisis. The masas, which is another one of the four portions of the animal's stomach, and the beis hakoisis, which is another section. That's where it gets made into little into the so the masas, I think, is the third one of the in the sequence. So the masas is the beginning of the stomach, where it's after it's finished with the rumination part. So the first two stomachs of the cow or any ruminant, it goes first. It first gets goes down and it gets like a little bit shaped, and then it can come back up. When it gets to the third, it already starts having digestive juices take it apart, and then it finally ends up in the keva, which is the last step before the intestines. So masas, which is the third, ubeis hakaisis, which is the second, which is still part of the chewing the cud process. Shenikvu lechutz, that they have a hole that gets them all the way to the outside, meaning that this masas and beis hakaisis are attached to each other. So if you have a hole in between them, that does not make it into a treifa, because I guess that's similar to its natural process. It always goes from the second stomach to the third stomach. So if you have a hole in between the two organs, it's not going to make it a treifa. But if it goes to the outside, into the abdominal cavity of the stomach of the animal, that's going to be a treifa. Nafla, so finally finished with anatomy for now. Nafla min hagag, if the animal fell off a roof, it got stunned when that happened. So it didn't stand up. So if you it means if the animal did not stand up, that makes it like obviously if it fell off a roof 1 inch, it's not going to be asa. If it fell off a roof and it didn't stand up, and you shechted it before a day passed, so we have to assume that it had some kind of concussion that was going to kill it, and it's going to be a treif. If you wait 24 hours and it's still alive, then it's not going to be a treif anymore. The shtabru roivtz loiseh. Another case is if most of its ribs got broken. I got into a boxing match somehow with a kangaroo. Udrusus hazev, an animal that was clawed by a wolf. There's some kind of venom, or more likely like bacteria. They're very dirty. It's likely to get an infection from the claws of a zev. That makes it into a treif. Yehuda drusus hazev bedaka. Yehuda says that no, it's not a general rule. If a wolf would claw a cow, it would not make it a treif. It's only on a small animal like a goat or a sheep. Udrusus ari bagasa, but the clawing of a lion, which is deeper, which is more likely to get an infection into an animal, that would even be on a cow. Drusus hanates ba'oif. The nates is a smaller bird of prey. If it clawed another bird, a chicken, it would make the chicken into a treifa. Oif hadak, and a small animal, even not even like a chicken or a pigeon. Drusus hagas, oif hagas. And the gas is a larger bird of prey when it would claw a larger bird, like let's say a goose or an ostrich. So I think the ostrich is not kosher, but whatever a large kosher bird is, so that the gas would be able to make it into a treifa, but the nates, which is a smaller bird of prey, would not be able to make the larger bird of prey into a treifa. Similar to what we said before by the daka and gasa with the wolf and the lion by animals. Now the Mishnah ends off that kalkosh ein kamaya kachaya treifa. Anything that something similar to it, the animal will not live, is a treifa. Number Shimon Lakish. Remez l'treifa min atayra minayin. Where do we see a remez to treifa min atayra? I guess the Gemara used this lashon of remez l'treifa instead of just saying minalam, because, like we said, this is all halacha l'meishim misinai, that these are the treifas. So we additionally want a remez for the general rule that it's something that doesn't live. And that's really the way the Mishnah ended off and said that this is the rule. So I don't know how it's going to be enough kamina la halacha, because we have to follow halacha l'meishim misinai. But I guess we want to know the truth. We want to know where do we know this from? That it's not just a chayk, that these are the 18 things, but there's a background, that there's a behind the scenes explanation of it. So where is the remez that treifa means an animal that's not going to live? The Torah says that is a torn tarif means torn, an animal that was torn apart in the field. You shouldn't eat. We want to remez specifically, not in general, that a treifa is also to eat, and then we know that the Halacha Moshe tells you what a treifa is, but rather, like we were saying before, how do we know that it doesn't live? The Tani Seifa Zaklal Kol Shein Kamaya Chaya Treifa. It says at the end of the Mishnah, whenever is not going to live is a treifa. Mechlal the treifa ain't a chaya. We see from here that a treifa doesn't live. Minalan. And like we said, even according to Ma'adam, it says that treifa does live. It just means it doesn't live. It lives for a year, but eventually it's going to die from it. So everyone agrees that a treifa is ultimately not going to live. So minalan, the chsev is ois hachaya shetoicheli. This is the chaya that you should eat. Chaya achol she'ena chaya loitefet. So we darshan, instead of chaya referring to a wild animal, we say an animal that is chaya, zois hachaya shetoicheli. You should only eat something that is chaya, that's going to live. But something that's not going to live, you shouldn't eat. Mechlal the treifa loichaya. So you see from here that a treifa is something that's not going to live. According to Mandama, who says the treifa chaya is going to live. So this pasuk is not a sufficient limud, because even though it's going to eventually die, but you wouldn't call it that's ashaloi chaya, since it's going to live, it's going to live more than a year. You wouldn't say this is something that's not going to live, even though it's going to eventually die from it. You wouldn't call it. You wouldn't be able to learn it from chaya. So nafkalim zois chaya shetoicheli. Zois chaya achol. Chaya acheres lo teichel. There are some things that are going to live that you should eat, and some things that are going to live that you shouldn't eat. We say Zois tells you only these you can eat, but there are other things that live that you can't eat. Mechlal, the treifa chaya. So he learns out from that a treifa does live. So Adarab, he learns both things. He learns, first of all, that a treifa is going to live, but also that there are treifas that, since they're eventually going to die, they are going to be treated as treifas. What is the other mandama? The mandama who says that you can learn it out from so what does he do with the second pasuk? I'm sorry. So he just darshans. he darshans this pasuk differently. He darshans that only something that lives you should eat. But the second man, the Amar darshans from the Zeus. Zeus achaysh, but others not. So what does he do with the Zeus? Hi Zeus my abadlay. We boy leilcha de Tanya. L'chatan de Beir Bishmal. He used the Tan de Beir Shol, the Tan de Beir Bishmal. Zeus achaysh etachelu melamet shetavas adush bochum yikol minu min beher loy Moshe. He took every type of animal and he showed it to Moshe. He showed him which animals are kosher and which ones are not. In fact, I need Zeus to tell you that the Rebbeinu showed him all the animals. The Gemara says, Ein Chanami, you take a ride and he's going to learn it from a different thing. Now this is very interesting, right? This sounds like a nice story time that the Rebbeinu showed the tray for animals to Moshe Rabbeinu. So what do you need a pasuk to tell you that the Rebbeinu showed them the animals to Moshe? So if you look at Taisus, Zeus Achayim Alamish Atavatz Baruch Kol Minu Min Beher La Moshe. There were three things that Moshe Rabbeinu had a difficult time with, and the Rebbe Shalom had to show it to him physically. And the V'loi Chashav Nami Ha, it doesn't. V'loi Chashav Nami, in addition to not saying our din of Trefus, it also did include the Amar B'Medrash, K'min Mabei Eish Herakadosh Baruch Hu L'Moshe. The Moshe Bereshim showed him what a chatzi shekel is. The chsiv zeh yinu shem alei choshev. So the chsiv zeh yinu, this is what you should give as a matzis, and he showed him the coin. So both that the shekel as well as the din of treifa, the Bereshim did not show them. So Gemara Tosfos says shem alei choshev elam midi din iskasha. Bereshim only showed him things that they were difficult. That means we only counted in the three things those things that are a problem. Even though it was shown to him, it wasn't that Moshe Rabbeinu had a difficult time knowing what the machzis of shekel was and what the treifa was. The Moshe Rabbeinu was just bothered not how to do it, how you calculate how big the machzis shekel is. He was just bothered by the underlying thing. What is this really so important? Does it make sense that you give a machzah shekel and you get a kapara from it? So Rebbeinu Shalom, to emphasize it, showed it to him, but it wasn't to answer a question. In order to emphasize it, so you could tell it to Yisrael. The Rebbeinu Shalom showed it to Moshe to tell him these animals are kosher and these are not because Moshe Rabbeinu had a difficult time with it, but just to tell him that he could relate to the Yid, and this is an important thing. So I guess because of this emphasis, that is why we felt it was necessary. Even the man Amar who's chaylik has to agree this Tan de Beir Bishmal. He wouldn't say that maybe like we say that someone who eats non-kosher, it causes a timtum alev. Maybe there's a reference to that. So that's what couldn't have been missing. So in any case, so if we need Zeus for that, so we said Eina Chanami. So Ela Treifa Chaya Minole. So where do we know Treifa Chaya? Nafkalam Idif Tan Rei Bishmol. Learn out from a different pasuk. The Tan Rei Bishmol. Ben Achaya Necheles Ben Achaya Shaloi Soichel Elu Shmoina Esrei Treifas Shenemru LaMoshe Misinai. This is a pasuk. It says the Torah says. In Dvarim, lahavdil ben atar ben achai necheles ben achai shaloi teyachal. We already said tamei and atar, which is the non-kosher and kosher. So we say the second part of the pasuk is a reference to treifas that live, and it calls it chaya. So it's only those things that will live and not those that won't. So in this brisa, right, we had said that it says over there that this brisa, it says that there were shmoina asar treifas. Now the Gemara asks, Elu shmoina. We could say that Elu shmoina asar treifas. Shenam l'moshe b'Sinai. Are there only 18? Va'ika basgar, which is a nutrican of the letters Beis, Samach, Gimel, Reish, the Shev Shmaitza, and also the seven additional ones that we were taught. So Zaktima. Those are not included in the 18. We're assuming that the ones in the Bryce are the same as the ones in the Mishnah. The Mishnah is also, our Mishnah said 18. And over there in the Bryce, it says that it was only 18. So what about these other four of Baskar plus the Shev Shmaitz of the seven additional ones? So Bishlam Latani Don, the Tana Udashaya. Asi Bazakla. Our Mishnah didn't say 18, so you could say it said the ones it said, and it left over others, and those were included. But he said at the end, Bizak that anything that can live is not going to be a tray for that. Anything that's going to die is a tray. What about the brisa that said Yudches and the Chayr them more? So now we're going to go through Baskar. So the first one of Baskar is Behema. Behema shenechtechu ragleh minakuva l'mayla, an animal whose limb, its back legs, its hind legs, were cut from on top of the knee. Treifa, which is a treifa. So Gemara Savala could be small. So that's Behema. Base Savala could be shemin dama yichayli lichaves u'lichayis. He also goes Shemin Elazar. Our Mishnah or the Brisa holds like Shemin Elazar, who says you can burn the wound and cauterize it, and then the animal will continue to live. Even though it's possible to do that, we're going with this Brisa is the Brisa of Tana Rebbe Shmuel, and Tana Rebbe Shmuel says an animal that can live is still a treifa. So even though you're able, what are you saying, that yichayli kavas al chayis, that it could live, but living is not sufficient to make it not a treifa. Shmuel is the man who says even if an animal can live more than a year, it's still a treifa. So Gemara Svira Ella Savala Kurshimin Elazar Amak Sheri. You have to say that it was misstated. It didn't say Savala Kurshimin Elazar Amma Yichayli Kavas al chayis, but Yichaylehi lichavas, and therefore it's kosher. So the word chaya was not precise. In fact, the second basgar, samach, chesaron, the samach in chesaron is reference is basgar, the samach in basgar. If it's missing from the spine, the tanan, kama chesaron b'shedra, b'shami amen shtei chulyas, if it's missing two vertebrae, it still says even one. That was talking about legabi, the din of tumah. That is, for an animal to be tameh, it has to. For an animal to be tameh, you have to have the tumas oil. Tumas negia is even for a very small amount of bone. I think I don't remember exactly what it is. Maybe kazayis of bone. But if there's also a tumah of oil, not where you touch it, but rather when it's in the same place, and that you need roiv of you need either the whole, I think, roiv of the, what do you call it? Roiv of the entire skeleton, or the entire spinal column. So the question is how much can be missing from the spinal column and still be considered a whole spinal column. So the Shammai says it has to be missing two. Beis Hillel says even if it's missing one, it's not going to be metam. The same thing will be in a treifa. The same amount that's missing would make it that it's not a full spinal column, would also make it that it's not going to be a treifa. Zakamara. So, Emphatic Gemara, what's the teretz? So, l'chayr we have one extra, it should be 19. The Gemara says, "Hamasas u'beis hakoyses tekachashpulu b'tatei chashvinu b'chada." We said two of the different parts of the digestive system. which is the third, the masas is the third stomach, and the basic case is the second, that we counted as two, they're really counted as one. We said if either of them have a hole, but they're really the same thing. We're talking about a hole in that portion of the digestive system. So, apik chada v'ayil chada. So you take out one and you put in the other one. We could put in the missing pieces of the shed.
Now, even though we said in our Mishnah, Nishba Hashedra, V'nifsek Chullin.
Right, so that's talking about the spinal cord. I think the Mishnah said, right, that if it's missing, if the shed broke and that caused the cord inside of it to be cut. But we're not talking about we don't really care about the shedra, about the spine itself. We care in the Mishnah about the cutting of the spinal cord, the nerves inside of the spinal. Right? Is that Menachem, that makes sense?
Again, this is, to me, I'm looking at like if it's missing, then for sure it should be if the cord was
No, because I think you can have the vertebrae, the
That's what I'm saying. I wouldn't
without
know.
affecting the cord.
Maybe, yeah.
I mean, I know people have cracked vertebrae all the time without being paralyzed. Menachem,
Yes.
I got it right?
Yes, you got it right.
Okay. Thank goodness.
So if that's the case, if over here, then of course the cord being ripped should definitely be a treifa.
Well, that's the Mishnah. The Mishnah says if the cord is cut, if the spine broke and that caused the cord to cut, that's going to be a treifa. Now we're adding, even if you're missing vertebrae without affecting the cord, that also will be a treifa.
You can also sever the cord without breaking the vertebrae.
Right, but the Mishnah, I don't think, contemplates that, because I guess that was like it could happen. It could happen naturally, or with the sticking in a needle.
Well, that's a good question. But one thing for sure, they're arguing whether it's one or two.
I mean, in any case, the Mishnah, I think, is just explaining how it happened. Certainly, that's the vast majority of the cases, right? That the spinal cord would be cut would be because of the breaking of the vertebrae of the spinal column.
Yeah.
So I guess that wasn't. I don't think that the bones were relevant over there in the Mishnah. It was just the case. So, va'ika gluda. What about a flayed animal? This is the one that, in practicality sounds to me very strange. That's a treifa. I would think such an animal would die on the spot. It's not a treifa. It's a nevela. Saval karameya. You couldn't live you wouldn't think you could live for 10 minutes. Saval karameya de machshav. Rameya holds it's altogether. It's not only is it not a nevela, it's not going to die on the spot. He says it could live forever, or at least for a year. Okay. But ika charusa mara. What about the lungs, the reya they were sick. They shriveled up. So Charusa, Mara Manktani L'Rabbeis Yehuda. We said Mara, which is the gallbladder. That was only the sheet of Yosef Bar Yehuda that missing a gallbladder is fatal. But the Rabbanan, the Roiv, don't agree with him. So Apik Mara, so we'll take out Mara from our Mishnah. We'll say the Brisa did not include Mara for Ayil Charusa. We'll put in the case of the shriveled lungs. Okay, so that we went through the Basgar, the four others. In fact, what about the 7 additional treifas that we were taught, that the Amoraim taught? The Amr of Masna. Hay Buka, the Atma. The Atma, the Shaf Miduchte. The Buka, the Atma is the thigh, the ball of the thigh, the ball of the thigh bone that goes into the socket, what we would have by our hip, I guess by the animal's hip. And it slipped out of its pocket and whatever was attaching it to the pocket, the ligaments holding it in place broke. So the animal is no longer able to walk. Like a horse, they would shoot an animal, a horse that broke its leg. This is something that the animal cannot be repaired, and therefore the animal is going to die. So it's a treifa. Laksa bekulya achas treifa. If an animal got sick in one of its kidneys, it's a treifa, which is very strange to us, right? Because we know that people donate kidneys. So you'd think one kidney getting sick. But this is unusual, right? It's a case where it's not where you took out the kidney, but it got sick. I guess kidney disease is progressive. Maybe once it got sick in one kidney, it's inevitably going to get the other kidney sick. Utnan, nidl hatchol. If you take out the tchol, which I think the spleen, it's kshera. That's only if it was taken out. If it has a hole in it, treifa, it's treifa. That's hard to understand how that works, right? You think that if I guess maybe it bleeds out from there. If it has a hole in it, then it doesn't repair itself and it just leaks. But if it's removed entirely, then I know people have their spleen removed. So I guess when you remove the spleen, that removal can repair itself. But a hole in the spleen will continue, I guess, maybe leaking poisonous things into the inside of the animal. V'amar Rabba Babachana Amar Shmuel. Simonim shenedalbulu beruban, the simonim, which is the kon and the vesht, that were displaced on roiv, that they're no longer in the place where they're supposed to be. That's also going to be a treifa. So we did 4 so far. V'amar Rabba Bar Shila Amar of Masna Amar Shmuel. Nekra tzela meikara. If a rib was displaced from where it's attached, I think, to the spine, treifa, that makes it a treifa. So that's the 5th. V'gulgeles nechvesa beruba, a skull that was mostly crushed, also is a treifa. That's 6. Basa chayves roiv hakeres beruboi, the basa that covers most of the keres, which is one of the stomachs, and I think it's the first stomach, I think. If it's on it's on roiv of it, if the basar that covers over most of that stomach, and if I guess most of it was removed, treifa makes it a treifa. So l'chayra we have in addition, so we have 7 additional things that were not included in the 18. So and for the Gemara, nekuve tamnaha. There were 8 examples in the Mishnah of things that had nekavs, that had holes in them. Chashvinu bachad, and you should count all 8 as 1. So we reduced ourselves from 18 to 11, right? It doesn't, you don't take out all 8, you make them only 1, so it's 11. Abik shev ayil shev. So we take out those 7 and we add these 7 that we just mentioned. What about the 2 things that are cut? Those should also be counted only as 1. Chashvenu b'chad, batzalu chad, and we miss 1. V'oid, derim sheider rava nami nekuvahi. One of the things that we said that, which was a nikav, we talked about the spleen that has a hole in it, is also a nikav. So we're consolidating all the nikuvim. That should also be included. You can't add it as an extra one on top. Alahanach tarti the afakta loy. We had asked before questions. We had said that there are a few things that were not included. So therefore we took out the one that was, I think, Shimon ben Elazar, and was an additional one that we took out and we replaced it with something else. Don't take them out. Include both the new one as well as those additional ones that we had asked questions on the original. And then we add the 7 and we take out, we consolidate the nikuvim into 1 and we consolidate the ones that were cut into one, and therefore we end up with 18. Okay, we'll stop over here. Thank you for your patience. I know this is not